Now, you'll note that this structure is complete, closed, unchanging. In a universe like that, astronomers only watch the sky in order to refine this model as accurately as possible, and nothing else. So, what you think the universe is and how it works controls the kind of questions you can ask, not some supposedly detached scientific view of things. And as for how far you can let the questions take you, that's just as controlled. Which is why the next place our story takes us to is an English cathedral in winter. Whole areas of investigation can be off limits when it looks as if the results might contradict the accepted view. Science can't rock any boats. I use the boat-rocking image deliberately because when Galileo's troubles started down south with the Vatican was when he was playing around with why things floated. It all began with ice floating in ponds or in bowls, and after various experiments, Galileo came up with the not exactly earth-shattering idea that floating had to do with things being lighter than water or not. Lighter, the object would float. Not, it wouldn't. Harmless enough remark, you'd think. Aristotle had said that floating depended on whether or not the shape of the object penetrated the surface of the water, like this. Same material, two different shapes. Round, penetrating the surface, goes to the bottom. Flat, not penetrating, stays afloat just like flat ice. Well, Galileo sacked that idea as easily as I can, like this. You can't do that to ice. Okay, so Aristotle was wrong. What was so terrible about that? Well, you'll recall that the accepted view at the time was the way Aristotle's cosmic structure included the idea that everything in the universe had a proper place in the grand scheme of things. So, you doubted one bit of Aristotle, like what he said about floating, and you doubted all of him, because his was a package deal. Now, the proper place in the grand scheme of things for the powers that be was, for the powers that were, at the top of the heap, and there could be no doubt about that. Well, you get the point. Science came north for safety. Galileo's ideas were, so to speak, put on ice, and he himself under house arrest. You see how at every stage in the past, people had a view of things they were sure about, and which controlled everything they did. What they thought the universe was, how it worked, what research ought to be carried out, what experiments to do. I'll show you how those different views produced different versions of the truth. And I end by asking, if truth is relative, how can we ever be sure of anything? And mightn't that just be quite a good thing for all of us? I want to go on with what I said last time, looking at the way your point of view colors everything you do. At any time in the past or present, science has done what it did because of that point of view, and then later on, changed that view. So I end with the question this series has been all about. Is truth any more than the truth as you happen to be seeing it at the time? And does that mean we should all be a good deal more tolerant about other people's view of the truth? So, your view of the world dictates what you do down through every level of investigation, even down to the point where, during your research, it controls what you take to be reliable evidence. Around 1912, in England, fossil fragments were found, the brown bits, that went together in a reconstruction like this. Stained from ages in the ground, a human skull in an ape face. Several bits were missing, the jaw joints and the chin among them. The teeth were worn the way human teeth get worn, and nearby were found flint tools and prehistoric animal bones. Dawn man, they called this. Now I'll do it again. Around 1912, somebody faked this lot. The stain was chemicals. The teeth were filed down, so were the flint tools, and the prehistoric animal bones had been collected from all over Africa. And the missing bits, the jaw joint and chin, would have revealed that the skull and the jaw didn't belong together. A con. But for 40 years, Piltdown Man was a scientific fact, because science was expecting to find the missing link between ape and man with a developed brain. This was such a clincher, the evidence wasn't questioned. But in 18th century pre-revolutionary France, the evidence for this was. See, peasants would tell scientists about these here stones falling from the sky, and the scientists would make this French sign. Science hadn't seen them, they didn't exist. As for the evidence of peasants, came the revolution with the peasants in charge, suddenly their rustic references became vital astrophysical data. By 1803, there was a book on meteorites. By a scientist, of course. Just as well for science. Otherwise, what would they have made of this big hole I'm at the bottom of, here in the Arizona desert? It's called Meteor Crater. So you see how the structure, the view of things at the time, controls what science does at every level, from the cosmic questions about the whole universe, to what bits of that universe are worth investigating, to how far you let the questions take you, what experiments to do, what evidence you can and can't accept. So you see how the only structure in the shifting, changing face of nature is the one we impose on it with our theories. Each one the latest version of what we call the truth. New structures, new versions of how the world works, only appear because of some bit of detail the old version couldn't accommodate that causes everything to change. In spite of what science would have us believe, that kind of switch doesn't happen because of science steadily and purposefully heading towards the truth, with one discovery somehow following another along the way as part of some grand plan. As you've seen, each structure in the past worked perfectly well. That's what the truth was for a while. And as for one discovery following another along the way, what way? Going where? The so-called voyage of discovery has as often as not made landfall for reasons little to do with the search for knowledge. Science, like all other human activities, is a product of what society at the time thinks is important. What science has done in the last few hundred years has been directed by that fact. The very logic that brings me back to ancient Greece, where the whole superstructure of Western thinking began, where the seafaring Ionians first noticed that everything came in opposites, up, down, wet, dry, hot, cold, and so on, and took Egyptian pyramid building techniques and turned them into pure geometry with which you could measure everything in existence. And then put together the logic of reconciling opposites with the geometrical tool for measuring the physical world and made what we call rationalism, the Greek way of putting a structure on the chaos of nature, and our way ever since. But you've seen how structures give way to each other, that no single structure is the only right way of seeing what you call the truth. So why should the entire superstructure, the Western rational system itself, be the only right way?